Welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for taking the time to join me today and to be here and have this conversation with me. As we've been able to talk about previously, there is the reason why I want to explore a few things with you is basically what I see in the world today. There's a lot of talk now about trauma and anxiety. And I've said this many times before on this podcast. While it's really important to have the language and to have a deeper understanding of what people may be going through, I also see a flip side of it where often just being able to label something can then be debilitating on its own. And often people get stuck and are unable to navigate their way through different life experiences. And speaking of life experiences, I know we also talked about something tragic in your life that perhaps not only created meaning for you, but then paved the way for the work you're doing today. And I'm sure we will get into all of that. But before we jump into the root of our conversation, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you've been doing.
Sure. So my name's Laurie Singer, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in the state of California, which means I can make an official diagnosis from the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Health Disorders. And I'm also national board certified in applied behavioral analysis. So I use these two different credentials in conjunction with each other, which makes my practice a bit different from others because typically you have one or the other, you don't have both. And one, the psychoanalytic part of my practice really focuses on the cognitive behavioral aspect, the thoughts in our minds that tend to get us stuck. And the behavioral part of it is how does our environment affect our behavior? And I think the combination of the two make an amazing therapy experience and helps people move along and get unstuck.
Yeah, yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I do want to come back to it because I think it's really important to understand how environment can shape our thoughts and behaviors. And I have been working in the addiction space for the past year, and that's one of the biggest things that I've observed is want to make changes, but they're unable to because they're not able to make changes in their
Right.
environment. And that could be even your family, your relationships, and that can be very difficult for people to pinpoint and say, oh, it's my environment that's causing a lot of my behavioral choices. So I do want to come back to
Sure.
that. But I am curious to also understand what made you want to go into this space and how have you been able to use your personal experience now to help others who, I think the reason why I relate to your story is because I also went through some adversity, not to the same extent as yours, but it prompted me to find meaning in my life and now have the opportunity to help others who are perhaps struggling in similar ways. So I am curious to understand that because there is that element of the hero's journey that comes to the forefront.
Well, the interesting thing is that not only I experienced the death of my son, which was extremely traumatic in itself, and at a young age, because when he passed away, I was only 26, and I already had a 5-year old at that time. But even before that, without realizing that I was experiencing traumatic childhood, my mom was an alcoholic and a drug addict. And she left our family when I was 10 years old, and my dad raised us. But up until that time, there was many incidences where she was, you didn't know what you were going to get when you got home. Was it going to be your mom drinking out of the bottle, or was it going to be somebody calm? Usually it was the first, unfortunately. But at that time, you have to remember that was 55 years ago when I was 10 years old. So there was no help for kids at that time. And my dad did the best he could, and he was a great dad. But still, it was a single parent, a father in the 60s, which was really unheard of. And then you had to explain to your friends' parents, where's your mom? I don't want my kid to come and play at your house because there's no supervision. which was actually probably a good choice on their part. But so sometimes I would say that my mom died because it was easier than saying, oh, she's an alcoholic and a drug addict. Who wants to tell any parent that when you're a kid? So that was traumatic. I somehow got through those years. All these years when I was younger, I did horrible in school. I was undiagnosed with ADHD and had a learning disability. So here now we have another traumatic event. Your mom's alcoholic and a drug addict. You're almost failing at a school. And then I got married when I was very young. I'm still married to my husband. We're very fortunate that it worked out because we were both so young. And then a few years later, I had a son die of cancer. So all of these things happened. And in a way, I would give everything to have my son back again. But his death, in a way, I can say now was a blessing in the fact that it made me deal with everything that I had experienced before his passing. And his passing got me back into school. It was mainly athletics because I was running. I never thought I would go back to school, but the coach kept begging me to come and run for the local college, which I did because I wanted to help families of kids who had kids in wheelchairs or were dying or something because I went through it and I could see when I would walk Jacob down the hallways or outside how a lot of individuals wouldn't even look at him because he was in a wheelchair, and I would feel so bad for him. And so I somehow wanted to give back to these families, and so his death was life changing for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I appreciate you sharing that. I know that's a huge part of your story, but still, I'm sure it's not easy to talk about. And like we've talked about a couple of times, trauma can limit us and we can stay stuck, but you've also had a perspective shift through all those experiences to be able to say it's, in a way, it's been a blessing. When did that shift happen for you, and how has that helped your ability to then navigate life? Because I think it's important for people to recognize that as difficult as things can be, and we can all go through very traumatic experiences, there is a bit of an agency that comes from looking at it as this is happening for me rather than to me. And even that simple shift in words can give you a bit more
Well,
agency.
I don't think it happened right away. I think it just happened recently. I hate to say it, but I wanted to do something for the kids. I wanted to do something for the families. The one thing I was good at after my daughter was born was running. And so I never felt good about myself. And I think that's the hard thing. When you have low self esteem, I always felt that I was dumb and I couldn't do anything because I was did so poorly in school. As I said, I was undiagnosed. So once I started running, I took those same tools to apply for a raise and I applied that to academics. And I still use that with some of my clients today with ADHD to really break things down in step by step format as if you're training for a race. And so I use those skills. I took breaks. Now we call them sensory breaks. But for me, it was okay, I'm going to work for 2 hours and then I'm going to go fold the laundry. I'm going to work for another hour and then I'm going to go outside and go for a walk or go for a run or go for a bike ride because it balanced me out. It calmed me down. And I ended up graduating the junior college as valedictorian and went to UCLA, got 2 master. Who thought, really? And
Yeah.
then that with Jacob, with his passing, I read the book When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And in that book, the author talks about when his son passed away, he did something to in his memory that made him feel good. And I was a runner. So I thought, okay, let's have a fun run and donate all the money to Children's Hospital in LA, but we're not going to donate it to research. We're going to donate it to the kids for toys, for computers, because at that time, Jacob's sister was 5 and she would come and visit us at the hospital, and there was nothing for her to do there. There was like a Mr. Potato Head with one eye and a mouth. And so I thought, let's buy toys for the kids. So probably about 20 years ago, Children's Hospital approached me and they said, hey, we'd like to work with you because we notice a lot of money coming in. How would you feel
Yeah.
about a child life program? And we would start it with you, with Jacob's name. And so
Yeah.
now they have therapies that work with the children and help them, the siblings, if a child is diagnosed with terminally ill that they're not going to make it, what can they put together for their family? How can they help these kids? That was never there before. And I've had
Mm-mm.
families come up to me at different functions and say, we used the Child Life program at Fort West. And if it wasn't for your program, my child would have nothing to do. And we just want to thank you. And then you start to think, wow, I guess this really did, this had an impact on other people in a positive way. We've helped so many families. And that's how you have to look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. And I think that's quite the dichotomy, right? Like, I think a lot of people, when they have gone through something similar to yourself, they don't want that memory to keep coming up. But in your case, you've had that through the annual run that you're doing, and it's been going on for 38 years, I
Yes,
believe.
that's right.
That's a reminder every year. But I'm wondering, because it's become so meaningful and it's creating this positive impact, it's almost like it's a good thing now, right? Whereas it's not perhaps reminding you of the tragic loss, but what you've been able to do with it in his name.
I think it's both. You know, you're right about that, that it does bring up memories. And sometimes it is difficult, especially leading up to the event itself. I always make a speech because we have performers, which is really cool. We have performers and they're from Always on Stage, and it's a group of adult individuals with intellectual abilities, and they shine on stage. And it brings a tear to everybody's eyes because it's just so special to watch them. But it is hard. A lot of the stories that we hear are, thank you. I want to thank Children's Hospital. If it wasn't for you, my son wouldn't make it or my daughter wouldn't make it. And my husband and I are sitting there and we're like, what about the ones that didn't make it? What about us? Can you say something for us? And so that part is difficult. And I do thank everybody there. And I know how much it means to other people, but you're right. It brings back that memory of him passing. And it's weird. It's like a catch 22, right? It's, you feel good about
Yeah.
what you're doing, but it will bring back those memories of your child passing.
Yeah. Yeah. I can appreciate that. It's definitely noble, but as you said, still difficult. And every year, just because a year has passed, it doesn't mean that the memories change and the pain isn't there. So I can definitely appreciate that. But coming back to the behavioral side, I am curious because you did mention when you were going through the motions and preparing yourself to go back to school, you had somewhat of a schedule around, okay, this is how much time I'm going to spend doing this, and then I'm going to go for a run. I am curious because from an ADHD perspective, I find that can be valuable. Whereas a lot of people get stuck in the, I get distracted easily and then I don't feel like I'm doing work. Whereas what I've found is if I'm continuously task shifting, I still need sufficient amount of time to do a task. So maybe it's a couple of hours. But then if I'm creating different sets of challenges for me throughout the day, I don't find myself getting distracted as much. And I actually feel really productive and good about myself. I wonder from a behavioral standpoint if that was intentional or if looking back you can maybe make some sense of it. And if that was helping with the ADHD, I'm curious to understand that a bit more.
I I couldn't have done it if I didn't have a schedule. I can't function without it. In fact, I have almost every hour marked down of what I'm supposed to do because otherwise I get so distracted. And thank goodness my husband is so understanding because I'll start doing something. Let's say it's, I don't have to sit at my desk or get something done till 10 a.m. in the morning, but I get up like at a quarter to 5 in the morning. So I'm busy. But if I go into my closet to get a pair of shoes, I might end up walking out without my shoes, but I have my jacket because I got
Yeah,
distracted because I looked at my jacket and I never got the shoes. So it's,
right.
so I walk out and wait a second, I went in for my shoes, not my jacket, okay, I'll go back in again. So I might start doing a bunch of different tasks, but at least I have understanding of it now. I didn't get diagnosed till I was in my 50s. And what happened was I was at a meeting with a bunch of professionals. I was the one contributing to the meeting, giving some type of talk. And all of a sudden I looked up and I said, "Look at the size of that squirrel." And everybody looked at me like, "What in the world is she talking about?" Because I had just looked at the window and saw this huge squirrel. And then I went outside, and one of the psychologists said to me, "Hey, Laurie, have you ever thought about going on medication?" And I said, "Why would I go on medication?" And he said, "For your ADHD." And I thought, oh my gosh. And of course, I look in the DSM and I checked every box.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. But it sounds like through that scheduling and being very intentional, that's a way of managing it. And the reason why I ask is because, again, people do struggle,
Oh,
right? So, are you able to share some tips? And I think just being very schedule driven, which can create other
yes.
problems, but I think just having some idea of around, okay, this is how I'm going to navigate my day can be helpful. But again, just wondering if there are things people can do to help.
So I think, yes, I think a schedule is very important. Again, though, you don't want to get so obsessed about the schedule that you don't deviate at all, right? Because that can create another problem because then you can get anxiety from just looking at the schedule saying I have to start by 10, I have to start by 10, and or keep adding things on before that. So I think free time is important. And free time I think should be filled with something that you really enjoy doing. For myself, I think exercise and getting fresh air is the best thing that we can do for ourselves. And it doesn't mean that your mind's going to turn off. It never turns off if you have ADHD, but it gives you some, I think it gives you, it helps keep you calm and grounded. So if you can go for a walk in the morning or do whatever you need to do, yoga, meditate, and then go back to your schedule. But again, I think getting started and keeping a clutter-free area was so important. I wish I had this growing up, and I know that a lot of kids have it now, which I think is fantastic because you're not going to fail, you're not going to have low self-esteem. But as a parent, you should be able to recognize or teachers tell you your child gets distracted easily, please look into having a clutter free environment, making sure that their desk is at the front of the classroom, making sure that their agenda is written correctly and that the teacher checks off on it to make sure that it's written. They need to check homework. So once you build these skills at a young age, it will carry them through their college years.
Mhm. Yes, no, I appreciate that. And in your own experience, you were talking about your husband being so understanding. And I do want to come back to that piece because, especially, I've heard this a lot, and there are some statistics which I'm not fully familiar with, but when a couple goes through the death of a child, especially at a very young age, that can often create a rupture in the relationship. I'm curious to understand how you both were able to work through that. And to your point, still together, obviously, what's kept that glue in place?
We were fortunate in the fact that we had a very close family, meaning my dad. My dad was very close to us, and Bob's mother and father. And so they really helped us a lot. Things happened so quickly with our son. It was awful. He woke up screaming one night, and then I took him to the doctor and they said it was an ear infection. I brought him home. I said, "This is not an ear infection." Actually, what was happening, he had a tumor in his stomach that was crushing his spine and he was going paralyzed. So you can imagine how painful that was. He had surgeries, chemotherapy, almost died, and then did die. And this all happened within 2.5 months. So we were living at the hospital for 2.5 months. And so it was just horrible. It just, everything happened so quickly. And I guess it's a good thing that he didn't have to suffer. But at the same time, how do you deal with something like that when things are happening so quickly? I think my
Yeah.
husband and I, like I said, we just used each other in the comfort of our family. Our family was very supportive, and we were lucky to have them. And I think that's another reason why I wanted to help families, because I could see how when a child has an illness, it you don't always have that support of the family. And a lot of times parents blame each other, especially different cultures, which we found interesting. Different cultures will say it's because you did this or you did that. And I feel so bad. And my husband and I, when Jacob was sick, there was no support for the families, really. It was like, okay, your son passed away, leave him here, he's gone, see you later, bye. And that was it. There was nothing. So I think now I would hope, and I know there is for the kids and for the parents, more support for them, because the real grieving starts after the trauma. And in the moment, you are shell shocked, so to speak, but you're not able to really deal with what's happened to you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing all of that. And coming back to navigating the trauma and even some of the behavioral issues, as you were talking about from the CBT lens, and we touched on it briefly, but I do want to expand on the environment piece. Why is environment, I mean, it is obvious, but why is it so important? And why do so many people struggle with the environment piece? And again, we can talk about relationships. There are other things I've noticed. There can be enmeshment, there can be codependency, which only contributes to the issues, but it takes a lot of work. And I think the awareness is probably the biggest piece, but often that's where it needs to start in, where it's missing.
So I think if you're talking the addiction part of it, like if you have an addiction, that part of the environment is extremely important, especially if you have a spouse or a partner who is has not admitted to the fact that they actually have a problem, or that maybe they are contributing to the problem. And that whole
Yes.
elephant in the living room type thing, where you finally realize that you have an addiction, but you have to explain to your partner, I know I'm the one that's abusing the drugs and alcohol, but you're actually contributing to my use as well. So and that goes into anything. It could be eating disorder, it could be depression, agoraphobia, any of that. Because I have clients who are depressed or anxiety ridden, but the parent or the spouse doesn't realize how much they're actually contributing to that individual's maladaptive behavior. So, what I do when they come to my office, because I like to work with a family unit, or at least a partner or spouse, whatever it is, and I have two separate data sheets that I use. And the data would be from the client's perspective, with the maladaptive behavior, would be what does the behavior look like? And then what's happening just before the behavior, and then what's happening as a consequence. So that's ABC data. That's from the client's perspective. So let's say you have a depressed individual, and the behavior would be, I stayed in my pajamas all day and I could barely get out of bed. I watched TV and ate. That was it. What happened just before that? My wife asked me, how are you doing today? Are you okay? Is there anything I can get you? And then what was a consequence of you staying in your pajamas all day? My wife made me dinner. She made me lunch. She checked in on me every now and then. I was able to watch TV. And then you have so then I would say to the wife, now you fill out your own data sheet, and this would be for a week. And then from her perspective, what did the individual say or do? So that would be the behavior. And then what did you do just before that? And what was a consequence? I ended up making them dinner, doing this. So they're contributing to the behavior, and they don't realize it. So when we analyze this data together after a week, it's an aha moment for most people who are contributing to the behavior. It really is. And they
Yeah.
don't realize. And some people even broke down in my office like, I didn't realize the part that I
Mhm.
played, because it starts off slow and then it just keeps building and building. So typically, I write two separate treatment plans, one for the spouse or partner, and then one for the individual that is actually came in for the diagnosis or
Right.
help.
Yeah, and I appreciate you building on that because I think for a lot of people, they can just focus. the focus can be on themselves, right? That, hey, I'm experiencing depression or I'm experiencing anxiety. But to your point, when you have that wider lens, you could see that there are other factors that are perhaps enabling it for them. Now, what about situations where it is induced, family induced, right? Someone's living at home, got a family, they're enabling their anxiety or depression. And in this instance, the family is not participating in the therapy. How do you work with the individual then to get them to feel, hey, maybe you need to change your situation to change how you're feeling or some of the behaviors? How do you get to that point? Because I think for a lot of people, that's where it becomes extremely difficult.
It is difficult and it happens a lot. And it
Yeah.
happens if the individual that's coming in for help is a small child, let's say, and we call them the identified patient, right? So
Yeah.
they're complaining about their child's behavior, but the parents aren't willing to make the changes in the environment or in themselves. Because what happens is once the identified patient, the child, no longer has the behaviors, then the parents have to focus on their own relationship and what is going on in that relationship that isn't working. So sometimes they find it easier, which is extremely unfortunate, to not help the child and then keep things as they are so that they don't have to focus on themselves. So that does happen quite a bit, unfortunately. There's also the part where if the child is old enough and can make the changes themselves, right? So the idea is to give them the power back. When people come to see me, they feel powerless. So if you can build a little bit of power and self confidence in them, and they can start to make those changes to get unstuck, they won't need their parents. It all depends on what age they are, really, because are they dependent on their parent house? What is the age that they're at right now? If I've had clients come in that are 15, 16, that are able to make those changes within themselves, and then they don't have to rely on the parent, right? And then I've had the child come back to me and say, I feel really good about myself. Now, how can we help my dad in his anger? How can we get my dad to see that he has anger problems? And it's like, your dad's just not ready yet.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's the other piece is that level of acceptance that I can only stay on my side of the
Yes.
street and do what I can do. The rest is out of my control. And I think that's a very important factor. I try to remind clients as well is that's all you can do. Otherwise, you're going to continue to fall into this trap. But speaking of anxiety, we've touched on it in different capacities. But while it's important to manage it, there's also a healthy aspect to anxiety. Otherwise, we wouldn't have evolved as a
Correct.
species. And understanding that because there can be so much shame or even just feeling trapped that, hey, I have anxiety, I can't do
Yeah.
anything. But your book, I do want to expand on that. The title is You're Not Crazy Living with Anxiety, Obsessions, and Fetishes. Curious to know why you decided to write that book and what are you trying to help people with? And I think it's what I can gather is just this level of acceptance that you can live with these things. They don't have to be a part of your identity.
What the One of the reasons why I wrote it was because I get a lot of referrals from practitioners in the area. And certain practitioners in particular would be dermatologists because we have the skin picking behavior, which is an OCD, anxiety driven behavior. And it could end up being actual mutilation to yourself. And one of the physicians said, "Hey, your techniques really work. You should think about writing a book." So I'm a real goal setter. So I set a goal for myself 5 years ago when I turned 60, and I said, I'm going to write a book. And so I wrote a book. And in that book, I decided to use myself as an example because like I had told you, I wanted to go back to school, but I was a horrible student. The college asked me to run. So I went. And in graduate school, they said, hey, if you go to therapy, 10 hours will count as 100 towards your internship. And I thought, oh, I'm in. I'm going to do it. So for the first time, I went to a therapist and she made me realize, you really didn't have a normal childhood and you never dealt with it. And the death of your son, you never really dealt with. So what happened? I started getting panic attacks, horrible
Mhm.
panic attacks. I couldn't drive on the freeway. It was awful. And so at that time, I was using something with the foster kids that was running around the bases. And I thought, okay, I'm going to create a visual for myself. Red means stop, yellow means make a choice, green means go. And what I'm going to do is I carried that with me in my car so I could get on the freeway. And if I would start to feel my heart coming through my chest, I would say, okay, Laurie, you need to just stop. You need to stop whatever you're thinking. Yellow, make a choice, make a choice. Listen to music, sing a song on the radio. Green, take some deep breaths. And I was able to do it. And I thought, wow, that's incredible. If I can do this, I should probably start using it with other people and tell other people. So that's how I came up with what I call in my book the signal plan. And I wanted to share
Yeah.
the techniques in the book, which are in the back of the book, the toolkit, a lot of the data sheets that I told you about, the signal plan, a few,
Mhm.
a motivational story. And I also wanted to share stories about obsessions, anxieties, because a lot of people can relate to this, or they get that feeling like, wow, I'm not so bad because look at this person. So the case studies are real case studies, and you can look at it and say, if they could do it, I can do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And absolutely. And I think that's the main point here is we all tend to have different things we're working with and through. Doesn't mean that we need to stay stuck. And I think that's the idea here is how can you live with these situations? Obviously, look at improving your situation, but not feel like you're stuck. And I think that's where a lot of the beliefs and patterns and thoughts can come in as well. Now, how do thoughts, I do want to get your perspective on this. How do thoughts often translate into behaviors? Or is it the other way around? I'm a believer that it's the thoughts that lead to our behaviors rather than if we were to behave in a certain way, then our thoughts would change.
So our thoughts create emotion. So we get a thought in our head and it can make us happy, sad, fearful. And like you said, some degree of fearfulness is what we need, that flight or flight, that do we run, do we stay? That's normal. In my book, I talk about an example of how anxiety, be, when is it a problem? When does it become debilitating? When does a thought that creates irrational behaviors, irrational thoughts. When does that become a problem? In my book, I talk about how let's say you love to go out for coffee in the morning. So you walk outside your apartment, you're on your way to get coffee, and a car is driving very erratically and it almost hits you. And you say, oh my gosh, that was close. Okay. The next
Yeah.
morning, you say, I am not going to that coffee shop, even though I think they make the best coffee. No need to take that chance. I'm going to walk in the other direction. So you walk in the other direction, you've sacrificed the coffee that you love for a different cup of coffee. Then you walk out 2 mornings later and you say, what if that driver is going this way? And what if he hits me this? Best not even to go out for coffee anymore. I'm not going to go out anymore. I'm just going to get a coffee maker and that's it. And then it starts to carry over into other environments. It's not only in the morning for coffee, but now you're fearful to go out to lunch with your friends, to go to work, to go to school. So it's affected every relationship and every environment. You have got a problem now. So it's those
Mhm.
irrational thoughts. If we can't stop them, then it's going to take over and you will be stuck and not be able to move forward with your life. And like you said, you got to think of yourself that you're taking a road in life and there's a fork in the road. You're either going to stay stuck on that road or you're going to move forward with your life. And it's just horrible when you feel stuck. And I think that everybody has the ability to move forward. It's just that some of them need more coaching than others.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what we were talking about before we jumped on the recording is sometimes you are able to deal with the situation on your own. Those little incidents can be a motivator, or sometimes things have to get really bad where doing nothing is not an option anymore. And sometimes that's where a lot of these traumatic events can enable our growth, as tough as it may be.
And they come out like I I was able to suppress everything that happened as a childhood, doing really poorly in school, always sent to the principal's office. My mom's alcoholism and addiction, and my son's death. I was able to shove that all in until one day when somebody said to me, "That's not a normal childhood." Oh, it's not? I guess you're right. Oh my gosh. So then it
Yeah.
started to affect my work and everything else. So it will come out at some point. So I think that being able to deal with it, don't wait too long, is all I can say. Don't
Yeah.
wait too long. And listen to other people. If somebody else points out to you, I think that's another big thing. We're so quick to become defensive. A lot of our reactions are so defense driven that if we can just be open minded and hear what the other person has to say about our behavior, maybe there is something to it.
Mhm. Yeah, I like to remind people the fact that, and myself also, the fact that one's getting defensive means there's some truth to it, right?
Exactly.
Otherwise, you would let it bounce off of you or just let it go over your head. Like it doesn't matter. But the fact that you're getting defensive, there's obviously something in that piece of information that you believe to be true. So that can be an opportunity to get curious. Now, based on the work you're doing and your book as well, what are some practical strategies for people that are looking to manage stress, anxiety, and even the unpredictable challenges that life will throw our way? Because that's going to happen. And we obviously talked about it even in this episode here. But yeah, what are some practical strategies people can employ? I can share some for myself. I think just being in general, spirituality has been huge for me because I've been able to tap into a deeper meaning of life and reflect on the stories of other people that have come before in even ancient times. And that just gives me a deeper sense of purpose that, okay, if they could do it in harsher conditions, then I can manage this. And based on everything we've shared, is also finding meaning through my own experience of being able to give back, work in this field as well, and help others. But that's just what's worked for me. But I'm curious to hear from you as well.
I think that's great. I think some type of higher power is really beneficial to people, to something to believe in. I think that's really important. I also think that, as we said before, our thoughts create behaviors, and I think that people need to say, if you could stop yourself and say, "Okay, wait a second, I need to stop. I need to think about what's actually happening here, or what I'm doing, my reaction." And I like to use something called thoughts versus reality. If you could write down, okay, what are my thoughts? My thoughts are, we could use the coffee as an example. Again, the person. My thoughts are, I can't go down the street because I might get hit by a car. What is the
Yeah.
reality of that? Okay, the reality is a car lost control one time. I've walked to get coffee for 5 years now at the same coffee shop. I'm aware of my surroundings. I'm not going to get more than 99%, 99.9%, I will not get hit by a car. So I think breaking down the thoughts versus reality gives us a sense of relief. Oh, that's right. Okay, maybe it is a little irrational.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the idea there of having that evidence based investigation, I would say
Yes.
almost. And I think that's what we talk about in CBT as well is, okay, what's the evidence here? Do I have actual factual information that supports my thought? And that's where journaling can be powerful too, to be able to write these things down. Because what I've observed is when I write some of these thoughts down, I can see how irrational some of them are. And again, thoughts are there for a reason. Doesn't mean I have to believe them all, but I can still write them down and debate whether or not it's serving a purpose.
I think that's really important. I think I'm data driven that way. And so I think taking data on your behavior and also finding out what happened just before that behavior, what happened just before that thought, and what was a consequence of it. And then using the thoughts versus reality, I think it's very powerful, especially if you start to read it out loud to yourself. Once you've written it down in that type of fashion, organized, and look at that and try to make sense of it. And you can also write down how are others contributing to your behavior if they are. And because you can ask
Right.
them, hey, if you start to see me do this, or let's make plans and really let's get out of the house. I need to get out of the house and do something. Then more than likely you'll have a friend or a partner that, yeah, let's do that.
Mhm. Yeah. And along the same lines, especially when it comes to unpredictable challenges, we've talked about environment, but I think there can be a lot of benefit that we can derive from a positive environment, especially if we're going through something extremely difficult. Like you said, in your case, it was really great to have family around, right? Like your in laws and your dad. But that is something I don't think a lot of people pay attention to. So if you're going through difficult situations in life, it's important to identify people that can serve a positive influence and building that support network or group around you and then having the right environment so you can navigate those difficult situations.
Yes, I think that's in part a huge part of it. And now that you mentioned that, what I realized was after Jacob did pass away, we moved out of that house. We couldn't stay in the house.
Mm.
So we changed our environment and we started with a
Yeah.
new one. And I think that was very helpful to us.
Yeah.
Just creating a new environment. And at that time, I had no idea what I was doing. I think that's a good thing about ADHD is you say, okay, I'm going to do this without
Yeah.
giving things much thought. But I think that's a good thing in a lot of ways. I see now, like when people come to see me and they're depressed or they find out they have ADHD, let's use that. It doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. It doesn't mean that if you're depressed, you have let's use that. How can we use that as an advantage to you? Maybe you feel more deeply than other people can feel about things, and if we can just get you not to dwell on that and move forward, let's use that as a positive.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for me, I definitely experienced a little bit of it during the pandemic. Like most people, again, you're cooped up. There's not a lot of stuff going on. And what I realize is I have to be extremely proactive so I don't fall into that pattern. So that's been helpful for me to recognize that in myself. And then it's actually led to being more productive in a positive way. So I can hold myself accountable and make sure I'm almost managing it proactively
Yes,
rather than waiting for something to happen and then spend 3 4 days to recover and not know what happened. So I think that's another thing. If you know that about yourself, build in certain practices. And it comes back to the whole idea around finding opportunities where you can do purpose driven work or find meaning in your experiences, because that, yeah, on a physiological level too, your body's releasing all the healthy hormones you need, so you're not actually falling into some of those depressive cycles.
I agree. I agree with you. I think, but then certain people are there to help other people. That's just, it gives, for me, it gives me purpose and I love it.
Mhm.
I don't know, I can't see myself not working ever. I do take more chunks of time off because I love to travel now and I love to
Yes.
be adventurous that way. But I want to continue to keep working 2 or 3 days a week as I'm getting older. For me, it keeps, like I said, it gives me purpose and I just really enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Laurie, thank you so much for coming on here today, sharing your story, being vulnerable, and then also sharing insights with us around all the work you're doing and how people can navigate these difficult situations in their day to day lives, but even the occasional unpredictable stuff that does come up. Now, for listeners that want to learn more about your work, be able to contribute in any way they can towards the annual race, especially working with families and the hospitals, what are some ways people can learn more about you and your work?
There's two websites that are linked together. So if you hook on one, you can look at the other one. One of the websites is You're Not Crazy book.com. And the other one is Laurie Singer Behavioral Services.com. So those two are connected, and there's a donation page. There's all about the services that we've been providing for 25 years now in Ventura County. My company works with individuals that have developmental disabilities, and we serve, like 130 clients in our area. So we
Okay,
make
perfect. We'll definitely put all of that in the show notes. But thank you again,
Oh, it's
Laurie.
really
Really
nice
appreciate.
talking with you.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
likewise. Thank you.
If you need